Hello, I'm Bruce Walton from Road Safety Analysis, and this is the 8th in a series of 10 bite-sized demonstrations of my favourite things which MAST can do. In this clip, I'm going to look at the numbers of crashes involving different vehicle types and different types of casualties, and examine some of the issues when you look at that kind of analysis. Now, in the last bite size that I did, we looked at casualties who had been injured as a result of collision with a particular type of vehicle. We looked at the examples of pedestrians being struck by goods vehicles. I want to look at the similar issue, but from a different point of view now, because instead of going into a casualties report, where the numbers I'm getting are numbers of hurt people, I'm going to go into a crashes report, where the numbers I'm getting are number of incidents. So what we've got there is a total number of incidents. Just to keep the numbers reasonable, I'm going to imagine that I'm looking at a particular area of the country because I want to examine this issue in detail. So I'm going to add the crash location dimension onto my filter tab to narrow it down to the area of the country where I want to look at. And just by way of an example, I'm going to choose the Avon and Somerset police force area. So I'll go in there and choose that police force. There we are. So just over 29,000 crashes in all in that police force area in the 6 years that MAST presently has in it. Keep your eye on that number because I'm going to come back to that number a little bit later on. Now, if I want to analyse those crashes by vehicle type, the thing it's very important to understand is that crashes can contain a mixture of different vehicle types. So if you have a crash between a car and a motorbike, and a crash between a bus and a motorbike, you have one car, one bus, two motorbikes, but only two crashes altogether. And this is the sort of thing that can cause a great deal of confusion if you're not careful. MAST makes it easy to deal with that kind of issue, and I'd like to show you how. I'm going to go onto the Rows tab and remove the crash date dimension, which I don't particularly want to use in this analysis. Instead, I'm going to add a crash involved dimension. Now you will see that there's a big long list of crash involved dimensions and what they've all got in common is they identify whether or not a crash involved a certain factor. They don't count how many times that factor was involved. For instance, a crash which involved pedestrian casualties is one crash, regardless of whether it involved one pedestrian or 20. Similarly, a crash that involved goods vehicles is one crash, regardless of whether it involved one car-based van or whether it involved 10 articulated lorries. They come down to one, whichever one of those things you choose. To continue the example we looked at in the last bite size, I'm going to select crash involved vehicle goods and add it onto my Rows tab. There you can see my 29,000 crashes divided down between nearly 26,000 that didn't involve goods vehicles and the just over 3,000 which did. Now, of course, goods vehicles come in different sizes, and I can drill down to see the breakdown of the different sizes. We have light goods vehicles, that's car-based vans and similar. We have heavy goods vehicles, that's large enough to be carrying a weight plate. And we have another category there, goods multiple. That is 114 crashes that involved both light goods vehicles and heavy goods vehicles in the same incident. There's no way of avoiding that if you want to avoid double counting when you report numbers. And one thing that you can always be certain of when you use MAST is that your reports will never contain double counting. Double counting is impossible in MAST. Now I'm going to add another crash involved dimension to this report. First of all, I'm going to go on to the columns tab, and this time I'm going to add one of the crash involved casualty dimensions. This looks at all the casualties involved in each crash and tells us whether or not a crash involved a certain variety of casualty. I'm going to choose, for the purposes of this example, crash involved casualty pedestrian. By the way, it's possible that in future MAST can have more crash involved casualty fields if there's an interest in the idea. For example, crash involved casualty young person or crash involved young driver are categories that may be of interest to the MAST user community, and we would be interested on your views if fields like that are going to be useful. So for the moment, I'm going to choose crash involved casualty pedestrian. And when I add that in, you will see that these crashes are further subdivided by whether or not they involved the goods vehicle and whether or not they involved the pedestrian. Notice that the number in the bottom right-hand corner, the grand total, always remains the same. We still have the same 29,000 crashes that happened in the police force area we're working in, and we can see that just 3 of those crashes involved both the pedestrian and goods vehicles of various different weight categorisations. Now let's have a look at what happens if you want to look at 2 different vehicle types involved in crashes related to each other. For instance, you might be interested in goods vehicles in collision with motorcycles. To demonstrate that one, staying on the columns tab, I'm going to remove the crash involved casualty pedestrian dimension, and in its place I'm going to put crash involved vehicle motorcycle. What this gives me is something that is sometimes described as a truth table. What I've got is 4 values that cross-reference every possible combination of did or did not involve a goods vehicle and did or did not involve a motorcycle. We can see that there were 293 crashes that involved both. There were 21,900 and odd crashes that involved neither, and a few thousand which involved one or the other. But the grand total still adds up to the same number. Double counting is impossible in MAST. You can take this analysis to a deeper level and look at different sizes of motorcycle compared to different sizes of goods vehicle. But always the number in the bottom right hand corner stays the same. That's why you can be certain that your report does not involve double counting and you're presenting the number of crashes, which in many ways is analytically the most useful value that you can select from MAST, can be presented safely and knowing that you're not being in any way, shape or form misleading. So there we are, that's how to use the crash involved dimensions. I've used them in a crashes report here, but of course you could equally well use them in a vehicle or a casualty report, as long as you understand that you are selecting something that's got to do with the crash, not got to do with the individual. Well, that's it for this bite size. In my next bite size clip, I'm going to be demonstrating something entirely different.